Meet Richard Vallières, a man whose life revolved around one of Quebec's sweetest traditions, maple syrup. He wasn't a tree tapper or a syrup producer himself, but he knew the business well enough to see its potential, both legally and, well, not so legally. Growing up in a small Quebecois town, Richard learned early on that syrup was more than a kitchen staple. It was a way of life, a lucrative business, and in many ways, a symbol of Canadian pride. For years, Richard watched producers toil through the seasons, collecting sap, boiling it down, and handing over their hard-earned syrup to the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, also known as FPAQ. To Richard, FPAQ wasn't just an organization, it was a syrup cartel. They controlled the supply, set the prices, and held their syrup reserves like they were protecting the crown jewels. And Richard? He hated it. Life for Richard wasn't exactly glamorous. While his neighbors celebrated modest syrup profits, he often found himself looking for ways to make quick cash. Legal or not, it didn't matter much to him. And then one day, while sipping his morning coffee, it hit him. What if he could bypass FPAQ altogether? What if he could sell syrup directly to buyers at a lower price? Better yet, what if he didn't have to pay for the syrup at all? Now, Richard wasn't planning to do this alone. Enter Avik Caron, an old acquaintance with a crucial connection. His wife owned a warehouse that just happened to store part of the Federation's strategic maple syrup reserve. Yes, syrup reserves are a thing. Imagine Fort Knox, but instead of gold bars, it's filled with 600-pound barrels of liquid gold. With Avik on board, Richard began assembling a crew, including truck drivers, rogue distributors, and anyone willing to help him pull off the biggest syrup heist in history. At first, it was all whispers and planning. But one day, Richard stood outside the warehouse and decided it was time to act. The crew would siphon syrup from the barrels, replace it with water to maintain the weight, and truck the stolen syrup to the black market. Yes, there's a black market for syrup. And yes, it's every bit as shady as it sounds. The operation began smoothly. Over the course of several months between 2011 and 2012, they siphoned syrup at night, working methodically to avoid detection. Each stolen barrel was worth about $1,800, and by the time they were done, they'd taken 540,000 gallons of syrup, valued at a staggering $18 million. It wasn't just a heist, it was a sticky masterpiece. But as with all great crimes, their luck started to run out. In July 2012, FPAQ accountant Michelle Gauvreau climbed a stack of barrels during a routine inventory check. One barrel wobbled and nearly toppled over. Curious, Michelle opened it and discovered nothing. The barrel was empty. At first, he thought it was a fluke, but as more barrels were checked, the extent of the theft became clear. Some barrels were filled with water, others were completely dry. The FPAQ sounded the alarm, and soon the Sûreté du Québec, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and U.S. Customs joined forces to investigate. It was like CSI Pancake Edition. They executed 40 search warrants, questioned 300 people, and traced the syrup trail across Canada and into the U.S. By December 2012, the investigation had led straight to Richard Vallières and his crew. Richard, ever the opportunist, tried to spin the story in court, claiming he wasn't a thief, just a businessman standing up to the Federation's monopoly. The jury didn't buy it. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison and fined $9.4 million. If he couldn't pay the fine, his sentence would jump to 14 years. Avik and other accomplices received shorter sentences, but the fallout was the same. And the stolen syrup? About a third of it, worth millions, was never recovered. Somewhere out there, someone's eating very, very expensive waffles. The Great Maple Syrup Heist wasn't just a crime. It was a cultural phenomenon. It highlighted the absurdity of syrup politics while cementing its place in Canadian lore. The moral of the story? If you're going to steal something, maybe pick a commodity that doesn't get people this emotional at breakfast. Thanks for watching, and if you're as fascinated by tales like these as we are, make sure to stick around for more.